Donald Trump's critics see the man as a menace to the Constitution. No, 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 says our guest today. It's just the other way. Donald Trump, a champion of the Constitution. Uncommon Knowledge now. I'm Peter Robinson. Welcome to another special Plague Time edition of Uncommon Knowledge. John Yoo is a professor at the University of California at Berkeley School of Law and a visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution. Professor Yoo served as Deputy Assistant U.S. Attorney General in the Office of Legal Counsel during the administration of President George W. Bush. He is the author of a number of books on the Constitution and the presidency, including Just Out, Defender-in-Chief, Donald Trump's Fight for Presidential Power. John, I'm at home in Palo Alto. Where are you?
I'm at the St. Regis Hotel in Washington, D.C., overlooking the Black Lives Matter mural right in front of the White House.
Excellent. Where you should be, I suppose. Okay, threshold question. We'll get to all the arguments in your book, but here's the threshold question. Is Donald Trump a legitimate president? Quote, Defender-in-Chief. Trump became only the fifth president, along with presidents such as John Quincy Adams and George W. Bush, to lose the popular vote, but win a majority of votes in the Electoral College. Law professor Akhil Amar has declared, and now you're quoting Akhil Amar, standard civics class accounts of the Electoral College rarely mention the real demon, dooming, direct national election when the founders drafted the Constitution, slavery. Donald Trump won 3 million votes fewer than Hillary Clinton, but wins a majority in the Electoral College, which the founders only invented because of slavery. John?
Peter, thanks for having me on the show again. I miss my partner in crime, Richard Epstein, but we just couldn't get him to write a book saying nice things about Trump, so out he had to go. Thanks a lot for having me about this book. And I want to explain, I didn't start out as a Trump supporter. I'm not a diehard Trump guy. I wasn't a never Trumper either, but over time, I've come, I think, closer to the view that Trump is a legitimate president and that he has been exercising traditional constitutional powers of the presidency. And I think you're raising the Electoral College as a good example. I think Trump has been on the receiving end of wave after wave of attacks to try to create the impression that he is somehow an illegitimate president. But in fact, he is the one selected through the working of the Electoral College, the way we've chosen presidents for over 200 years and the one designed by the framers. If you think Trump's illegitimate, you think the Electoral College is illegitimate. And there are many people on the Democratic Party, or the far left, I would say, actually, not the Democratic Party, right now who are demanding the abolition of the Electoral College process.
That's a centrist Democratic position, isn't it? Hasn't Hillary Clinton called for the abolition of the Electoral College? So in other words, you've set it up perfectly, because in this, you've got two things going on here. The book, brilliantly, it pains me to give you a compliment, of course, John, you and I are such good friends, but the book it just brilliantly shows that we'll come to these arguments, that one way after another in which Donald Trump has defended the Constitution of the United States. But then you've got the second underlying argument, it's 248 years old, that claptrap document that had to take account of slavery in the first place. Who cares if he defends that old document?
Right, I wrote the book before the 1619 Project, before all the attacks on our institutions and monuments today. But the Electoral College is not some ramshackle window dressing for slavery, which is, I'm sure, what you would read about in the New York Times.
That's exactly right.
It balances these competing concerns. On the one hand, the framers did not want the president to be picked by Congress. That was the other competing method of selection, because they saw from the state constitutions bad things would happen if the executive was just the mere agent of the legislature. They quoted Montesquieu, who would have this aphorism: the combination of the executive, the power to execute the laws and make the laws, was the very definition of tyranny. It's a maxim they repeated over and over again. So on the one hand, they wanted the president to be chosen in a way other than through Congress. At the same time, they didn't want to have a direct popular election. The Constitution, in many of its aspects, is actually anti-democratic. It is a Republican form of government. It tries to slow down and dilute direct democracy. They didn't want to have direct election of president because they also feared demagogues and dictatorship. And so the Electoral College, it does give the people the voice, the choice of the president, but it ameliorates it through the states, right? It's really the state legislatures that pick the electors. And then through the idea of giving smaller states a slightly greater say, because as you know, the Electoral College votes are allocated by members of the House +2. So if you're Delaware, you get 3 votes, not 1. And in very close elections, that throws the elective states a balance, somewhat greater balance in the say of who's president. You can see it seems a little bit ramshackle, as you said, when you look at it. And I can't think of any other countries that have such a system right now. But at the same time, you can see how it tried to balance in between these two competing designs. The framers tried to pick something in the middle.
And in the current moment, it's important to note that, as I take your argument, slavery had nothing to do with it. There was the 3/5 clause elsewhere in the Constitution, but there's nothing in the debates, the constitutional debates, concerning the Electoral College that touches on slavery. Is that correct?
There is one sentence made by an obscure framer in the Constitutional Convention that says, oh, well, maybe the Electoral College will give some advantage to the southern states. And he doesn't say slavery, doesn't explain why. From that one sentence, despite all the other comments about the Electoral College, which never mention slavery, don't talk about it, this argument that it's racist has arisen. But the second thing is, if the Electoral College was racist in 1787, then every other aspect of the Constitution is similarly racist, right? Because the members of the House are allocated under the 3/5 clause, as you mentioned. So the members of the House is racist. The Senate gives greater votes to states rather than to the people. So that must be racist too. So the Electoral College, if you think about it, is the least infected body in the government. And then after the Civil War and after Reconstruction, when the 3/5 clause is eliminated, all that's removed. And you can't say today that the Electoral College has anything to do with slavery or racism. All right. So Donald Trump is a constitutionally legitimate president of the United States. And whatever your disagreements on the Constitution 3/5 clause in 1788, when the document is ratified, nobody has any claim against the Electoral College in 2020. Right. All right. So, John, Defender-in-Chief, Trump's battle for the Constitution has taken 3 basic forms, and you're going nowhere until we get through all 3. First, he fought Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation and the Ukraine impeachment. Well, we'll come to impeachment in a moment. First, the Mueller investigation, which consumed more than 2 years of the Trump administration. For that matter, it consumed 2 years of the nation's energies. Trump is fighting for his survival. Why would you glorify a base political struggle for survival as a defense of the Constitution? The Constitution always does that. That's the beauty of it. I don't even argue that Trump knows he's doing this, right? I don't even make a claim that Trump is consciously defending the Constitution. Of course, he's fighting for his self-preservation, his political future in the Mueller report and impeachment. This is the beauty of the Constitution, is that it tries to funnel people's political self-interest into a greater constitutional good. And this is James Madison in the Federalist Papers. He said, the way the Constitution is meant to work is that ambition must counteract ambition. The interests of the man must be connected to the interests of the place. By that he meant, yeah, Donald Trump, Nancy Pelosi, you pursue your political self-interest. The fighting between the president and Congress and the judiciary, the conflict, is what will keep the government within its bounds. And that will be the best protection of individual liberty, far more than going to the courts and suing or writing down all the rights we could think of in the Bill of Rights, which they famously called mere parchment barriers. It really was a Donald Trump who should defend himself, who should stand up for executive privileges, executive rights. That, in a way, helps guarantee that the government as a whole doesn't get out of control and then it becomes so big and so powerful it's a threat to our individual liberties. So I'm not making a claim that while he's fighting Mueller, Trump is saying, as maybe a constitutional scholar like me or former White House official like you would sit there and go, he's got to protect the prerogatives of the presidency. This special counsel is an outrageous tumor on the purity of an executive branch responsible to a single president with the power of removal through all the subordinates. I don't think he thought that. That was what he was achieving by fighting Mueller so much, and that is a greater constitutional good.
All right, the seriousness of what was taking place during the Mueller investigation, again, I'm quoting you, John, Defender in Chief. This is a longish quotation, but it's very important.
I'm sure it is beautifully, beautifully written.
I didn't say that.
I am sure it sounds even better than it reads, unlike Wagner.
After November 8th, 2016, Election Day, FBI Director James Comey and the FBI leadership could have recognized the constitutional authority of the new president, Donald Trump. They could have informed Trump of the investigations into his campaign and asked him whether they should continue. If they believed that Trump had interfered with a valid investigation out of his own self-interest, they could have resigned and taken their concerns of a cover-up to Congress. Instead, they treated the new president himself as a target and then dared Trump to stop them, close quote. Now, tell me I'm not being hysterical, but as I review outrages against the Constitution in the course of this country's history, I come up with the southern states seceding, and then I come up with this. The law enforcement agencies of the federal government rejected a constitutionally elected president of the United States, or refused to accept his legitimacy, and began to undermine his administration before he had even taken office. Again, tell me to calm down, please, but that just strikes me as one of the great constitutional outrages in this nation's entire history.
Well, let's not forget so basically everything LBJ thought of doing every time he stepped foot in the Oval Office to begin the day. Or let's not forget Watergate and Nixon. But
Actually, serious point. The FBI, and it seems clear the other intelligence agencies are in on it too, undermining the president of the United States, that makes Watergate, it makes Nixon's ridiculous little plumbers operation look like a trifle, doesn't it?
He tried to use those same agencies to pursue his political opponents.
All right.
The thing that makes this bad is that the same agencies went after another major political party's presidential candidate on their own, at their own direction. And I'm not sure which one's worse, but at least I just want to point out, there is the trench warfare about Comey firing him, about all the headquarters staff at FBI trying to run an investigation, which they are never supposed to do, at a Washington, D.C. downtown headquarters against first a candidate of a major political party, and then a sitting president. But I think the point I want to make is there's a larger constitutional principle at stake here, which is, and it goes back to the difference between the founding and then the way the Constitution was changed by the progressives at the beginning of the 20th century, which is right under, I think, the vision that Trump fought for, even though he may not realize it. That's the version of the founders, which is the president's elected. He is the only one in the Constitution charged to see that the laws are faithfully executed. Right. Everybody who works for him is an assistant. He can fire any of them. He can order all of them around, but they're all just there to help him enforce the law. The vision brought in by Woodrow Wilson and the progressives, the vision that I think Jim Comey thought that he was pursuing, and that the Washington elites support is, no, government's too hard for elected politicians. Right. We should have experts. technicians, scientists in charge, professionals. They should do their jobs as insulated and free from political control as possible. Right? That's Jim Comey. He thinks he's such a professional. He gets to override the results of the 2016 election. He gets to decide who's fit or unfit to be president. That is not just right Comey versus Trump. That is also the conflict between two very different visions of the Constitution. And I argue in the book that Trump is trying to return us back to the more Spartan idea of government and the executive branch. Comey, in a way, is fighting for this idea of, and maybe even Comey doesn't realize it, technocratic, scientific government of the kind that Woodrow Wilson would have loved.
So we heard over and over and over again, you still hear it. Oh, yes, but the independence of the FBI must be protected. It's ridiculous, isn't it?
It's anti-constitutional. The idea that you should have the only independent branch should be around is the judiciary. No part of the executive branch. If you read the Constitution, it doesn't talk or make provision for any kind of branches that should be independent from president, because that's how we hold them accountable through our elected representatives.
All right. Executive prerogative, quoting Defender in Chief again. The second of the three main ways Trump has defended the Constitution, quoting Defender in Chief, he stood up for traditional executive leadership, close quote. Now, you make quite a lot of Alexander Hamilton and his famous comment in Federalist number 70, in which Hamilton insists on energy in the executive. Federalist Papers are arguing that the Constitution should be ratified, nevertheless, they are extra-constitutional documents. Explain that, explain the importance of what Hamilton says and how it relates to our understanding of the function of the executive, the correct functioning of the executive.
Yeah, also let me just say, the Federalist Papers are extra-constitutional, but they are almost, this will appeal to the White House speechwriter in you, they are the best written speeches in favor of the Constitution.
Unbelievable, yes.
Yeah, and they are talking points. They are spread throughout. The basic arguments are shared all throughout the state ratifying conventions amongst the Federalists. And so they are more than newspaper op-eds. Not that either you and I have anything to say criticizing newspaper op-eds. That's how we make a living. But they are more than that. They are very deeply philosophical. They're amazing. Some people think it's America's greatest contribution to political science is the Federalist Papers. And they are seen as an authoritative explanation for many questions about the Constitution. And so what Hamilton was talking about there, and Hamilton's got to be right because they made a Broadway musical about him, and they don't make Broadway musicals about unimportant people. Actually, I want to produce a Broadway musical about Madison. That's clearly going to be the next hit. Madison, exclamation point.
All right.
But anyway, so Hamilton's view is...
Keep your day job, John.
So Hamilton's view of Federalist number 70, he is trying to explain why is there a president at all? There was no independent separation of an executive from the legislature under the Articles of Confederation. Most states at this time picked the governors through Congress, through the Assembly. They basically had almost prime minister systems like in England, parliamentary systems.
Right.
So Hamilton's reacting to attack after attack on this new Constitution. Where does this president come from? Why are you giving him such powers? Why are you making him independent of Congress when everybody else makes the governor subject to the control of the Assembly? And he says, it's interesting, in Federalist number 70, he explains it quite clearly, and it goes back to Locke, to Hobbes, to Machiavelli, this idea that the executive has to be concentrated in one person because it needs to act with energy, with swiftness, with decisiveness, because, and this is his main point, the executive is the only part of government that's always in being, that's always there to react to emergencies, crises, unforeseen circumstances, to protect the nation, and then to enforce the law. And he said, what has happened at the states, when you combine the executive and legislative branches, when Congress becomes too powerful, Hamilton said, you have oppression. He said that's when you start to see the oppression of minorities. That's when you start to see disrespect for rights, because there's nothing to check each other. You need to have both branches be as powerful and fighting each other as possible, because that's how you then make sure that tyranny doesn't result.
We don't need just King Kong. That's bad for the little people on the ground. We need King Kong fighting Godzilla, because that creates space for the rest of us. Use that in any lecture you like, John, without attribution. I offer that for free.
I kind of thought, I don't know if you watched these hearings of the House Judiciary Committee with Bill Barr.
I did. I missed it yesterday. Was it
Oh,
good?
but he kind of looked like a very depressed King Kong on top of the Empire State Building, while all these, little airplanes were swatting. He was just swatting them away. He got so tired of it all.
Traditional executive leadership energy, one way that they express themselves is in the president's power of reversal. Trump, you argue, gets the economy moving again. Part of it is statutory, enacts a tax cut that goes through Congress. But part of it is the president acting on his own authority to reverse regulation after regulation after regulation. The most notorious example of reversing or undoing something that a predecessor has done is Trump's reversal of Obama's immigration policies, you argue, notably the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program, or DACA. Why was that a big deal? Why was that constitutionally a big deal?
I think it's incredibly important. And of course, I think you've nicely overlooked the fact that my prediction about the Supreme Court standing by Trump on this was utterly wrong.
I have not overlooked it, John. That comes next. But you just give us a little setup on what DACA is and what the president did, and then I'm going to hit you with a hard question.
It was, I think Yogi Berra said this about predictions, that wouldn't be so hard if they weren't about the future.
Okay, DACA, what was it? What did Trump do?
So DACA, if you remember, started in 2012. President Obama wanted to find a way to allow the dreamers, as we call them, to stay in the country. These are people who were brought into the country as children, but in violation of the immigration laws. And now they've grown up, but they're in the armed forces or doing public service or in school law. I would like them to be able to stay. But under the Constitution,
through no fault, they didn't break the law.
Yeah, they didn't. Right. Well, they did break the law, but not intentionally.
No. Right.
But the Constitution places the power of immigration in Congress. Congress decides how many people get to stay. It decides the categories of people who get to stay, and it funds the Border Patrol and ICE, and they're the ones who detain people and remove them from the country who aren't supposed to be here who aren't here illegally. President Obama comes in and he says, well, Congress won't add the dreamers, so I'm just not going to enforce the immigration laws against that class. And then 2 years later, he says, and their parents, and the parents of people who are here illegally but have children here who are citizens. So he increases it gradually to approximately anywhere from 6 to 8 million aliens who could be removed, who are here in the country illegally. He says, you can stay, we're going to give you a work permit. So I argue, one of the great powers of the president we don't really focus on, and a great check on the president as well, is that one president's deeds can always be undone by the next president in the exact reverse fashion. So, one president appoints a cabinet member, the president can fire them. A president can issue an executive order, the president can remove the executive order. As I'm sure you were there at the beginning of the Reagan administration. I'm sure the Reagan administration spent its first day just overriding all the Carter executive orders. And Carter, I'm sure, did that when Ford took over. So it seemed to me just that parallelism meant that when Trump came in, he could do exactly what Obama did, issue an order saying, well, no, we're going to start enforcing the immigration laws at the same rate they were before DACA and DAPA. The remarkable thing, the thing where I was wrong was thinking that the Supreme Court would agree with Trump. And as you saw just a few weeks ago, I think John Roberts, very mysteriously said, no. If even though Obama did this through an order, President Trump has to go through this thing called the Administrative Procedure Act, which is a 2 or 3 year process that Trump has to use to undo that order. So I wrote a piece, and I argue in the book, if that's possible, think of all the things that President Trump can do now by deciding I'm not going to enforce the immigration laws either. He could say, anyone who gets a STEM degree in the United States, I'm not going to try to remove you from the country. Anybody who brings money, invests it in American business, I'm not going to try to remove you from the country. And why does that even have to be limited to immigration? He could also say, I'm not going to enforce federal firearms law. You got a gun, you can carry it around. Or how about, gosh, everybody in the country, particularly the ones in the inner cities where the economy's doing so bad, you just pay 50% of the taxes you owe. Oh, the IRS has better things auditing my tax returns than to send them to go chase you down.
All right,
It
all right, all
really
right, all
opens
right.
up this huge list of options that the Supreme Court opened up, even though it was intending, right, to inflict a short-term political rejection to the Trump administration.
John, two quotations, and the first is you. Supreme Court blocks Donald Trump's reversal of Barack Obama's actions on DACA. John Yoo says, according to Chief Justice Roberts, the Constitution makes it easy for presidents to violate the law, but reversing such violations difficult, especially for their successors. Such a rule upends the text, structure, and history of the Constitution, close quote. Adam White, your friend, your colleague at AEI, which I didn't list all your appointments. You have an appointment more or less everywhere. AEI is one of them.
One place I can't get an appointment is my doctor.
All right, stop. Adam White. This was just the latest in a string of cases in which Roberts' opinions for the court have created or reiterated doctrines mitigating the wild swings in policy. The Chief Justice's focus on the court's institutional role deserves attention and credit, close quote. So this power of reversal that John Yoo makes so much of, and that Donald Trump has used, you argue, to such good effect. In fact, presidents come in, they reverse what the guy before did, then the next one comes that reverses what the woman did, perhaps someday, and it creates one wild swing after another, such that the Supreme Court has to step in and mitigate these wild swings just for the sake of stability. John?
Yeah, again, that is the conflict between our 18th century founding constitution and this idea of technocratic management of the government, scientific bureaucracy, right? If you're in the scientific bureaucracy, yes, Adam's right, you want to have stability, you want to have expert judgment, you don't want wild swings. But the founders' constitution is designed for the people to immediately translate whether we agree or disagree with what our government is doing into policy by the electoral process. It's designed to have wild swings of this kind through elections, right? The Revolution of 1800, it was called, because Thomas Jefferson won the presidency and his party came into Congress, completely changed public policy, changed in many ways the future of the country. Under this era of the Administrative Procedure Act and making things slower and more deliberate and transferring all the power to these bureaucracies, I bet the Jeffersonian Revolution of 1800 couldn't have happened.
Right. So it might or might not be reasonable. You let Adam White and Chief Justice Roberts discuss that in the faculty lounge of some fancy law school. What is clear is that it is unconstitutional, ahistorical and unconstitutional.
I think of it as like a tumorous cancer on the body of the Constitution.
Okay.
Huge growth that won't stop. Right? The bureaucracy will not stop growing. It keeps getting bigger. It is escaping the control of politics. And so in a weird way, this power of reversal that you mentioned, I talk about is, in a way, again, it's Trump's, again, he may be acting just out of his own political self-interest, right? To say, call it the swamp and say he's draining it. But what he's doing at a higher constitutional level is he's trying to restore political control over the bureaucracy. And you can see, right, the FBI should be independent. Agencies should take their time and not be responsive to the presidency. It is an effort to defeat that kind of political control over the government that the founders thought really was the main chapter.
Energy in the executive and foreign affairs. You note that the president has reduced the American presence in, among other places, Syria and Afghanistan. Defender-in-chief, quote, critics conceive of war as presidential adventurism, unchecked by congressional fecklessness. But they cannot understand the Trump quandary of a Congress that is more warlike than the president. Explain that, Sean.
And so, again, there's this long-standing debate, again, just on this issue as like the other issues about the scope of presidential power and whether Congress has to declare war before the president can use force. I've long argued in this debate. that was always built on this idea that presidents have some kind of political interest in being more activist abroad, in intervening in lots of places. And that was Congress that should be checking the president, but presidents have overridden their declared war power and so on. And this is an argument that started in Vietnam and has become a constant feature. What that whole argument was built on was the idea that the president would be more aggressive abroad than Congress. And when you see the polarities reversed, when it's Congress that doesn't want to reduce troops in Germany, it's Congress that doesn't want to leave in Syria, it's Congress that doesn't want to leave Afghanistan, and the president who does, you really see that the Constitution does give the president, through the commander-in-chief power, that control over war making, because it shows that the Congress can't force a president into war. It can't actually stop a president from withdrawing us from conflicts, no matter how hard it wants.
John, the Trump court, the third of the three main ways Trump has defended the Constitution, defender-in-chief again, Trump has appointed a Supreme Court that could return the Constitution to its original understanding on questions ranging from governmental power to individual liberties. Trump has changed the trajectory of constitutional law. Explain that, John.
Part of that,
Do you want to take a little bit of that back? Were you a little just, now you're closing a chapter and you're getting worked up and you want to take that back or mute it a little bit?
no, I think even his critics would admit that he changed the trajectory. Because think about what would have happened if Hillary Clinton had won, and Hillary Clinton had filled the Scalia seat. Right? You would have had a 5-6 justice liberal majority, and think about where, right, the constitutional agenda of, you mentioned Hillary Clinton's all for getting rid of the Electoral College. The Democrats, most of them during the primaries were in favor of packing the Supreme Court to 15 justices. They're the ones who are supporting the idea of independent counsels running around criminalizing our political disputes. They're the ones who don't see any limits on federal power. Right? They're proposing right now a Green New Deal, which would nationalize the energy sector of our economy and transportation sectors of our economy. I think it's a real difference between what would have happened in a Clinton court, the kind of people they would want, and maybe this will happen if Biden were to win, as the polls suggest. And the kind of people Trump picked. I think Trump has been, this will probably be his longest lasting legacy and impact on the Constitution, maybe in the way it was with Reagan as well, is the kind of people who put on the Supreme Court, and just as important, the dozens and dozens of lower court judges he's appointed are very well-known, committed originalists. People who believe in interpreting the Constitution based on its original understanding. And I think as someone, I've been involved in judicial appointments for a long time, since early 90s, both Congress and in the executive branch. I think President Trump has picked